Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. I'm getting a little bit of background. I love to see your faces if you don't mind keeping your cameras on. And if you're getting a little background noise, we could mute those until you're going to talk to me. Well, thank you for that introduction. And I want to start with that chat. So if there's anything that you're thinking of that has helped you through this difficult and challenging time, put that in the chat. And it's also something I like to do with my own students. Just start with a slide like this and something that they have to sort of sign in with. It's an entrance ticket, essentially. So it could be a favorite song, something that they've watched most recently, a movie that they would recommend to anyone. Not always, and not usually something that's connected to the course itself, but something that connects them to each other. I'll give you a little bit of background about what's happening here. So we have some choice about how we are going to, how we teach in this time. And the choice that I've made is a compromise. So I read all the information about how to do this well, and I read all the information about how to be kind to our students and to address issues of access and equity. And in the end, I came up with a compromise that probably makes nobody happy, which is that I have half the time on a Moodle page, and I think some of you use Moodle as well. So some of the material that they have to do, some of their activities are on Moodle and asynchronous, so not at the same time. And we have just a half an hour to 3/4 of an hour in class out of the 75 minutes each week. So I record some lectures that they can watch on their own time, but we're together for between a half an hour and 45 minutes on Zoom as we are now. And that's when we really focus on activities, discussion, questions, and problem solving. I want to start with my opening thought here, which is another thing I tend to do with that opening slide for my students. And it comes from a friend of mine here in Canada named Lisa Dixon. And Dr. Dixon gave a webinar early in the summer. And what she said for us in preparing for this kind of teaching is that what we needed to be doing was taking our teaching philosophy back to the studs. Now, many of you may have teaching philosophies. It's a statement that says not only what you do as a teacher in the classroom, but why you do it. So what's your core philosophy? What's essential to you about how you behave in the classroom, and why do you do it that way? But her point was there are all kinds of things in our teaching philosophies that in fact we might have to jettison, or other things that seem even more important because of this strange moment we're in. One of my disclaimers is that although I can claim some expertise in active learning, I had never taught online before this term. And my other confession is I had hoped never to teach on. This is not something I ever wanted to do. So what I've been trying to do is to adapt some of the basic principles of active learning that I've been teaching for years to these sort of multiple online forums. So that's what we'll sort of walk through today. And what I'm going to do is give you some of those philosophies, definitions, strategies, and problems. And we're going to do this by, as much as possible, playing with some of those simple active learning strategies that you can use, either on Zoom like this, so face-to-face, or on your on a Moodle page or a classroom management system. So I want to start with a quick poll. And I think I can set that up. So what we're going to do is to just think about how you're feeling right now. And it's a simple scale. It's 1 to 10. So 10 means you feel great. You're doing wonderfully in your teaching. Everything's fine. What's everybody talking about? 1 is you are barely holding on and you're really hoping for retirement soon, and then somewhere in between. Okay, so here's your poll. So if you can see the results there, we've got nobody down in 1 and 2. That's excellent. We've got a lot of people sort of clustered around 5, 6, and 7, and the majority of you, slight majority, 9 of you, are at 8. So you're doing better than better than the average, better than in the middle. So that's wonderful. I determined early on that I was going to try to stay around the 5, 6, 4 area, just so that I was always on my toes. So if I was much less than 5 on that scale, then I had to do something quick. And if I was too comfortable, then I would have to watch myself as well. Now, do some of you use polls in your, I'm going to stop that share for a second. Do some of you use polls in your classes? How are you using them? You could chat that, or you could actually jump in. For ice breaking, yeah. So just as I did with, write something in the chat, you could start with an ice breaking poll. Who would win in a fight, Iron Man or the Hulk? That kind of important burning question. Yeah, warm up when there's a statement to find out what they feel. The nice thing about these polls, and they're similar in Blackboard and Collaborate and other different sorts of online things like Zoom, is that you can make them anonymous as well. So you can tell the students that, if you're asking what they think, you really just want the poll. You don't want necessarily to know who they are. Yeah, how much they like the session. So polls are really helpful for those quick evaluation classroom assessment techniques. So quick evaluation of something that's happening in the class. Did they like it? Did they not? So that, yeah, all of those are excellent examples. Wonderful. Well, I asked you just really briefly to say how you were doing. I'm actually going to ask you to chat for a couple of minutes now. I'm going to put you into, or rather, Doyo is going to put you into groups of, since we haven't figured out how to allow me to do that. Groups of 4 or 5, and I'm just going to give you about 3 minutes to chat, say hello to each other, and just check in to see how you're doing. All right, so about 3 minutes to say hello to each other, and then I'll pull you back out. Well, thanks for bearing with us, going out and coming back in again. I joked that this was all part of our plan, but it's actually, I'm really glad that it happened, because I don't know about you, but stuff goes wrong all the time for me. It just goes wrong. And one of the things that struck me this term is that we really need to make sure that when things do go wrong for us, that we handle it cheerfully and then move on, because what we're doing is modeling good failure for our students, right? And then we have to let them know too that we can be that flexible with them. We know things are going to go wrong. And one of the things I kept telling my students at the beginning of term is, whatever goes wrong, we'll figure it out, right? There's nothing we can't come back from. We'll figure it out. I think the one that I enjoyed most was when I was recording a class and burped rather loudly while I was doing the recording. And I just told them, I'm not going to cut that out. I'm just going to leave that in. We'll be fine. We'll just move on. Anytime we do that sort of thing, it's going to humanize us a little bit. Well, I'm going to share my screen with you, and the person who wants more time, we're going to put you back in a breakout group in a little while. Share that screen with you again. And just go back a little bit, because this session is about active learning, and particularly sort of pivoting some good active learning principles to this new reality. So in case this is not familiar to you, I've got a definition here from Eisen and Bonwell, which is a wonderful little book, a little old now, from '91, but I still heartily recommend it as an introduction to active learning. And what they say is that analysis of the research suggests that students must do more than just listen. They must read, write, discuss, or be engaged in solving problems. More important, to be actively involved, students must engage in such higher order thinking tasks as analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Within this context, it's proposed that strategies promoting active learning be defined as, and here's the simple definition, instructional activities involving students in doing things and thinking about what they're doing. So if you want to come away with a really good, easy, portable definition of active learning, it's getting students to do things and getting them to think about what they're doing. I think that second one we often miss. It's the meta, the above, right? The meta aspect of learning. And just to give you a quick example, this week my students have been rewriting their first major papers. But in order to get a better mark, I don't care so much about the rewrite of the paper itself. They have to write me a meta essay explaining what they learned from their mistakes and how they change them. And it's that I grade. So I didn't just get them to rewrite, I then got them to think about what they had done and how they had learned. So there's my quick definition of active learning. I'm going to ask you if you notice something coming up in the chat that I should know about. Could you tell me? Because the way I have things now, I can't see chat as well as everything else. So just if something comes up in the chat, I should know about. All right. So this is where we're going to go to another break room. If you think about active learning in those terms, just getting students to do things, but to think about their learning if possible. What are you doing now in remote teaching and learning and active learning that's working? So what's something that you're using? It could be as small as a poll or an entrance ticket. It could be something really large that involves them in being active. So we're going to put you in those groups again. And what I want you to do for those 7 minutes is talk about what's working for you now and choose one person to report out with one idea that you'd like to share with the group. If others have other ideas that don't get raised, you can put those in the chat too, but each group is going to come out with one idea for active learning that's working. By the way, when I have my students go into their breakout rooms, I ask them to have more than just that one role. So I usually ask them to choose a reporter, a timekeeper, a chair, and the chairperson's job is to make sure that everyone stays on task and everyone gets heard, and a scribe in case something has to be written down. But in this case, you only need one reporter. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. And it's the one thing that I will miss about Zoom when we're past this and we're no longer I love to see everyone Zoom their way back in again, right, back from a break group. So I hope you had good conversations. And what I'd like to hear now is one thing that you've decided to share from your group that is working and that feels like active learning, even at these extraordinary times. So who would like to start? Rayanne?
Unfortunately, we focused on what is not working.
Well,
number of students.
Yeah. You focused on what was not, and it's the number of students.
I have 46 students. My colleague had 180 students, which is not working online.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you have them like this, or do you have them sort of doing asynchronous?
We are using Zoom, Moodle, Google Drive, Nearpod, and other tools to have our students interacting with us during the lecture. Still, if the number of students is more than 20, online doesn't work. I'm sorry.
No, and it just bumps into the other page if you're like this. And yeah. So I think that's a helpful thing to talk about. What's not working instead of what was. Maybe we'll come back to that one, and maybe you have other suggestions about those too. Did someone come up with something that is working in active learning?
Indeed, I guess we were not good students, so we didn't agree on who will present, who will be the spokesperson. I volunteered myself now. We had discussed various things indeed in our conversation. Please add if I miss anything. So we also discussed that the icebreakers are working well. Polls, chat box discussions, case discussions, case studies. and project assignments. These are all working well, but now hearing Reyhan Hoca, yes, with 100, I don't know if this will work. The number may be an issue. And one of our colleagues is teaching a mathematics class, which is a little hard, right, in the virtual environment. We also discussed that with the, classes like mine, human resources, which is more verbal and discussion based, it's so easy, it's working well. But with classes like mathematics, it's harder, because it requires writing down. But the tablets are a big help, as we heard from Arzu Hoca. If I missed anything, please add.
Thank you very much. And in the chat, Ryan just pointed out that if you can't give feedback on things, then it's not going to work. And that's a really interesting problem we might come back to. So if you're doing something with 20 students, you can give them some kind of response. If you're doing it with 100 students, then you're going to have more difficulties. Thank you for that. Anyone else come up with one that you'd like to raise that is working?
Yes, actually, we have someone to talk from our group. I don't know she will or she want me to. Where is she? I couldn't see.
Go ahead, Şule Hocam.
Okay.
Şule Hocam, are you looking for me?
No. We were with Zahide and Esin Hanım. So we talk what I did. We talk with, and I learned what Esin Hanım, she has done it. And little bit, maybe Zahide Hanım can talk for herself. I just couldn't really get the result what she had. The thing that I'm doing to pull their attention, because for the previous semester, I felt like I'm talking to walls, and I said it's not going to happen like this. I feel so bad. And then I have to pull their attention and get them excited. And also, I mean, they are young. They are really young. I mean, they are not really able to do what they're supposed to be doing socially. So I have to be like showing good things to them. And I don't want to complain too. And then I said, okay, I decided last semester, and I'm still doing this one this semester too. And then I think that it is working. And I don't know how you're going to name that. If it is a method, I don't know how it is called. I'm sorry about that. But what I find out is during the lecture, if I am repeating something that I have already lectured previous lecture hour, this is one question, or whatever I said just right now, a minute or 2 minutes ago, and then I'm asking, and what did I say? Okay, and then a couple of students are trying to answer them, and some of them, sometimes, of course, the answers are not coming, and then they said, I'm sorry, I was not there, something like that. I said, if you are going to give me the right answer, I will give you 1 point. And then I have I have done one table like this. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And then I am putting plus signs there. And I said, whatever you will take during the midterm, I will give extra point. For example, if they have plus signs, 5 plus signs or 4, I will add that one to their midterm grade. And if it turns out to be real, sometimes like a competition, and there are 3 of them is trying to answer, and I'm really being happy like that. I'm being happy. And I said, okay, who was first? And then she said, sometimes no, I was first. Okay, I'm giving 1 point to all of you. So, and there are some students, of course, they didn't even get 1. And then I said, today I'm going to work on that person. And I'm going to ask on you a couple of times, please get ready. I'm warning him or her in advance also. And one time I've succeeded, but it is being really hard if a person is not willing, he's not willing. I mean, I cannot do much. So this is how it was, and it is being a little bit active. I mean, then I feel like I'm with them. And at the beginning of the lecture also, I am talking with them, how was your day? And then they are talking about if there is any person who they know has been COVID. And they are talking about that too, and trying to make it a bit softer environment. Then I'm starting to my lecture. Of course, it's taking some time, but otherwise it's being like robotic. I don't like it. So this is what I do.
Yeah.
And what Esin Hocam did, her classes little related to math and computer. They are, I guess, using some software, and then she's trying to set up a competition, I guess, right? And students are answering the questions from chat. And she's not saying what is right first, and then at the end she's explaining, right? I mean, I don't know. You can explain better than I do. It was what you do.
You explained perfectly. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Lovely. Well,
Another thing that we, discussed in our team was, actually I mentioned about it, using the breakout rooms. At least in my case, and we discussed that, the strategies or the activities that we use to foster participation in our classes seem to be area dependent, right? Area specific. So I'm in the management area, Faculty of Business Administration, and since it's an applied area, we mostly have case studies, short case studies, sometimes long case studies, and students are expected to read those short cases before the class. And when we just started the class, I assigned some discussion questions about that specific case study. And in those breakout rooms, together with 5 friends or 6 friends, they discussed those discussion questions. So as Shuri Hocam mentioned, they are not always very motivated. Sometimes when I, go back and forth between the breakout rooms, I just found them talking about personal matters, just chit-chatting, etc. But majority of them, at least more than half of the students, seem to be really involved and participating in that type of case discussion. So that I really find it very useful.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's a wonderful active learning strategy, the case study, that translates rather nicely to online. So that's almost seamless, isn't it? But I like your point too about the breakout rooms, as I drop into mine periodically as well. And when I wander the classroom in a normal year, I can tell, right? You can selectively hear whether students are on task or not. It's a little weirder to actually put yourself in the breakout room and then come back out again. But I'm with you. Most of the time, especially if I've got somebody who's supposed to be chairing, they do stay on task. I'll mention one more. What I started to do this term, when I realized my third years were really struggling and I was getting that wall, Shula, that you mentioned of blank faces, and I felt as if I was speaking to nothing. I started the class with a 5-minute breakout group, just random breakout groups of 4 or 5 students. And their job was just to say hello to each other and see how they were and chat. Because this is something that my students, and it sounds like your students too, are not getting. They're not getting that kind of social connection to other students. And when they come in like this, to this wall of other faces or black boxes, it won't feel natural to them just to start a conversation in a class. So that gives them the sort of the 5 minutes before class starts. And it has made, I won't say it's made a huge difference, but it's made a little difference in that class to their engagement. So those are some wonderful ones. Does somebody else have another active learning strategy that is working online that you'd like to share before we maybe go back to the disastrous stuff?
Yeah, we were together with Julian, Tufan, and Jeren, and there were several suggestions. Like Julian said, that essays he gives. So I just going to talk about more like the assessment, although that's what we talked about. Julian said essays he's giving, and it seems like it's working, right? It's taken a lot more time for him to grade, and he has to prepare the lectures much more widely or thoughtfully before, as we were in class in person. I completely agree. It's taken so much time of our time to prepare. And I shared one strategy that I'm using because I'm in biology and I teach biology courses in addition to bioinformatics, which involves software and computer programming. And I use like video exams. So I actually ask questions to students, and they have to tape their answers. And then like 3 minutes each, 5 minutes total or 6 minutes total, and upload it on Moodle. And I grade videotape midterms, which I'm enjoying for the first time in my life, a midterm. So practically, because they really put some effort into it, and some of them are very self-conscious, and some of them are very relaxed. So they do their job with the cats and dogs. So, but it's becoming more of a fun thing, but some of them are really hating it. Overall, I don't think students are, so they are complaining a lot. And it could be because of my course, I'm not sure.
You're not alone.
So that's my experience. And one additional thing that I use chat a lot to ask questions. Yeah. And my students who is able to program actually generated a code. So we take the Zoom chats and parse them so that we know who's spoken during a course. So we have like a tool that I can actually, we can get like a word cloud from a chat to see what has been spoken in class. So I think these could be helpful. Mm-hmm.
Those are lovely. And I love the idea that you've actually hit on something out of necessity that made you like doing the midterms. That's gold. That's wonderful.
Although I could not finish them. That's the other problem. I'm still working on them.
Yeah, and I think if things there are as they are here, we're all reporting that everything seems to take us twice as long as it used to, and that's for many of us who were already working at capacity, that's a big strain. So our institutions need to recognize that somehow. Thank you. Well, those were wonderful. A number of smaller suggestions that are working well and some bigger ones. I didn't want to leave the opening question, which is, I always love it when my students actually shift what I've asked them or undermine my question in a clever way. And talking about the things that aren't working also is pretty good. So do you want to just take a moment, and anybody's thinking of something that's not working in active learning right now, we want to put it in the chat?
Sorry, there was another comment in my group. Late hours, they were really significantly diminishing attendance as well as, understanding, because Jaran said that late hours aren't working. Yeah. Beyond 8 o'clock.
Yeah. Yeah, the one I just put in is my students are actually just not doing work. I usually lose 1 or 2 students over a term. I'm going to lose a third to a quarter of my students unless by some miracle they get their papers into me in the next week. That never happens.
I'm finding my 8:30 Sunday morning classes are dropping down. My 9:30 Saturday morning classes are dropping down.
Yeah.
8 o'clock Monday evening classes, a 2-hour session, is dropping down enormously. Now, I do put all my slides on Moodle so students can catch up, but of course they miss that spoken element in which I elaborate. I'm in humanities, by the way. I'm in archaeology, so it's slightly different from some of the scientists here. But it's This is a timetable, not my devising. Timetable that wasn't devised by any of us here, but we have to live and get along with it. But it simply is not working. Not 8:30 on a Sunday morning, certainly not.
No, exactly. That's right. Yeah, and we've got some other from before, the more requests for feedback, which is good in some ways, but also a stress on you. Resistance to change for students. I think that's really interesting. And I'm certainly finding that in my upper level students. My first years, oddly enough, they've never experienced anything else. So they're a little more biddable, if you know that word, that they're willing to do what I say a bit more. And the third years know that life is better than this. And so why should they have to do this thing? Lovely. Well, I want to ask you a question that I sort of began with, which has to do with your teaching philosophy. So I put that on my first slide, and I'm going to share my screen with you again. And that was the idea of shifting your teaching philosophies. So what I mentioned briefly when we started was that I have a teaching philosophy. It works really well for me. I'm quite confident about it. And when I looked at it again this summer, I realized that I'm actually not going to be able to do everything that I normally think I'm going to be able to do. So what I had to do was to decide in this context, in not only in teaching and learning, but in a global pandemic where my students are going to have stresses on them that they've never had before. What are the things that really matter so much that I cannot give them up? So this is coming back to Lisa Dixon's suggestion that we take our teaching philosophies back to the studs. So I'm going to ask you just to write for 3 minutes about what is really essential to your teaching. So what can't you give up, no matter what, whether you're online or not? This is not something you're going to need to share, but it's just something I want you to focus on for just 3 minutes, please. So you're just writing. And that was also not a lot of time to give you. When I went through the summer as much as possible, going to conferences and talking to people and reading and really trying to figure out how it was that I could do online teaching, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, I had never wanted to do, I came up with 4 things that I really wanted to focus on for my new statement of teaching philosophy. Keep it simple, be flexible, stay connected, and be kind. And the be kind won't be as familiar to you as it is to us in Canada. All our health officers, our public health officers, tend to end their briefings, no matter how bad the news was, with a suggestion that we should be kind to each other. So those are the ones that I keep coming back to. And my temptation is always to make things more complex. But I try to keep the number of platforms my students have to learn down to a minimum. Stay connected, not only me with them, but them with each other, and also me with other people that I teach with. So if you've come up with some of the principles from your new down to the studs statement of teaching philosophy, and you're comfortable with it, you could add that in the chat. Now, when I give workshops on active learning, what I say is that even if you're doing all lectures now, there are 3 really simple things you can do to make those lectures more active. And they are the reflection break or pause, the quick write, and the think, pair, share. Now, basically, we've done all of those already in this session. We've just done them online instead of in person. And what I've got on the right-hand side of the screen there is a wonderful book, 65 different kinds of lecture breaks that you could use to reinforce learning. And there's some really good research that suggests that even taking 1 minute after a 10 or 20-minute lecture and asking your students to do one of these 3 things increases their understanding and their retention. So the reflection break just means stop, you could ask them to think about something, stop and write, as I just did for you. And those things that are written could be shared, they could come into you, or the students could just spend that time writing them. And the think, pair, share is easy to do with breakout groups as it is easy to do when people are side by side with each other. So the nice thing about these 3 really adaptable, basic, low-level techniques, and I say low-level because they don't require a lot of time, they don't require a lot of risk, and for the most part, you could put them into a lecture on the fly. You don't have to plan for them. The nice thing about them is that they are really easy to adapt to a variety of different things on Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate or any of those synchronous platforms. So things like an opening question becomes a new reflection break. Entry and exit tickets, so something that students have to do before they enter the classroom or leave the classroom. Polls we've talked about, the chat, and I'll just mention, because we won't have time to do one. I'll mention what 1, 2, 3 chat is. In 1, 2, 3 chat, you ask a question and you ask your students to write their answer in the chat, but not hit send, not hit enter. So that means all students have a chance to write what they want to write, but they haven't necessarily seen the answers of the students who are a little faster on the draw. So what you say is 1, 2, 3 chat, and at that point they're allowed to press enter. That gives them all at the same time an answer. And it also avoids what sometimes happens with my students, which is that they don't answer, they wait till somebody else answers and they just say the same thing as somebody up above. So 1, 2, 3 chat, they all put their answer into chat at the same moment. Breakout rooms we've talked about. And the whiteboard, I'll head here. The whiteboard on a lot of our platforms is a really helpful thing to have students post anonymous ideas. One of my favorite strategies in the classroom is the snowball. And in a snowball, you have students write a question, for example, on a piece of paper. It's anonymous, and then they make it into a snowball. Canadian students understand snowballs. Put it into a snowball and then throw it at each other, not at me. They throw the snowball around the room. It's a little bit of kinesthetic learning at the same time. And they really enjoy it. And then they have to pick up at least one snowball and then read the question that's on that piece of paper. I usually do this before an assignment is due because it gives students a chance to ask what they think might be the stupid question. They don't want people to know it's coming from them. So someone else reads it out and it's a little safer. I love that strategy. I can't have them, bunch up their keyboards and throw them at me. So the whiteboard gives me an alternative to the snowball. It's a little less fun, but it still allows them to put anonymously up on that whiteboard any question that they have. And the thing I'll end with is the idea of the exit ticket. In active learning, there's a really common strategy called the 1-minute paper. It's usually on a 3x5 card. Students will write 2 things: a most interesting point from that lecture or that class from the day, and a question they still have. And the nice thing about those is that you can come back afterwards, sort through them, answer the questions, but also point out that what you thought was interesting might not be what somebody else thought was most interesting. So you can report back on them afterwards. So that's what I'd like you to do before you leave. You can post a question, and I'll stick around until all the questions are answered, or a most interesting point, any kind of last thought from today's discussion of active learning and the dangers or difficulties of teaching during the pandemic. My final thought for you is that for me to be able to get through this, and I'm still relatively cheerful, but I'm really struggling this term. I'm struggling a lot. I'm finding this really difficult. The one thing that really has kept me going is that I found a couple of people that I can Zoom with and talk about why we're struggling or how we're doing. So if you don't have it already, find a teaching community, a few people that you can connect with and check in with you. And ask your students for help. I did this before my classes started this year. I'm going to do it before my classes started next term. I'm emailing them and asking for their advice. Here are the things I'm thinking of doing. Is this going to work? They won't all agree, of course, but making your students real partners in their own learning, in the design of the course, makes a special sense now, because this is not something that most of us have done before. And as I said at the beginning, not something I have expertise in. So I try to bring them in. So I'm going to stop that there. You're going to put, before you leave me, your most interesting point or question you still have in the chat. And I will, I'll work through some of those questions as we leave. But I'll turn things over to you now. Oh, nice question, David. Why should people be anonymous? Don't we want students, citizens who are responsible for their ideas and actions? I absolutely believe that. So I like the, we have anonymous evaluations of teaching here, and I'm not convinced that they should be anonymous, or at least I tell my students that they should never say anything anonymously that they wouldn't be willing to say face-to-face. But for the questions before an assignment, I'm happy to have those anonymous, just because this is not a matter of responsibility. It's more a matter of my poor students who are desperately afraid of failing or looking stupid. And this way, what they think might be a stupid question is going to come out of somebody else's mouth. Yeah, so Amanda said the number of students for the best learning environment, 16 to 20. Research about online learning, that's really interesting. And I don't know the most recent, and I think there'll be a lot of interesting research coming out of this pandemic. I realize we're past the 1 o'clock mark, by the way, so if people have to go, absolutely, while we work our way through the chat. But one of the things I see as a concern coming out of this, and it's in my institution, and I don't think they're alone, is that too many of my administrators think that they can save money by putting 100 people on a Zoom call like this, rather than, so my first year class has a Senate mandated cap of 40. Why can't it be 50 or 60? We don't need classrooms anymore to fit them in. So that I think we all have to push back on, and you're absolutely right. The research will be helpful for us to be able to do that. Yeah, respect for the difference and curiosity for the unknown are important elements. They absolutely are. Yeah, Julian, you have kids at home who are also online learning. Yeah, this is it's not a problem that I'm going through. My husband and I both teach, and both of our children are gone. But so many of my colleagues are struggling with that, and my students as well. Some of them have two parents at home working from home, and then 2 or 3 siblings all on the same Wi-Fi trying to do their courses from home as well. Oh, thank you, Rayanne. Change your plan when you think your students are exhausted. Yep. Yeah. And that how are you that I asked at the beginning, I ask that periodically of my students, and I have to plan for about 10 minutes of hearing the answer, because that's really important. Have I missed a question in there? Like the idea of doing the 1-minute paper. Yeah, I like it too. Forget the students, faculty are exhausted. Quite right. Yeah. So does somebody want to end us, give us an ending here that just talks about how we can look after ourselves better? Please. Yeah, I know. I just.
What was your question, Shannon?
How we can look after ourselves better, and the answer is retire. In the chat. Seriously, I can retire now. But I'm not doing it. I kind of want to see how this ends. I kind of want to see how this works out. So I'm sticking with it for now. But every once in a while, I think, all I need is that 2 months notice. Well, maybe I'll say my other last word. So I suggested asking your students for help and finding your teaching community. But I think we also need to recognize that a lot of that sense of stress and exhaustion that we're going to watch for in ourselves and in our colleagues, it's not something that we're responsible for, right? This is something outside ourselves. And so, just coming up with 2 or 3 things that we can do to make ourselves feel better, that's helpful, but it's not going to solve the problem. And so, we really do need to push back on our administrations. We need to make sure that they know what the experience of teaching is like here, and that this is something that we can do maybe for 3 months. We're not going to be able to do it at this pace for 2 years. This is not sustainable. But that wasn't a cheerful way to end, was it? Was this? It was lovely to talk to you. And the more I talk to people, the more hopeful I feel. Yeah, exactly. Keep going. Carry on. Well, I will. Yeah, sleep is definitely good. I'll do the traditional Zoom thing because I can't resist. I have to wave. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Good night.
Folks, thanks for joining me. Good night. Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
right.
That was very nice.
Thank you.